Hello and welcome back to Chat About It, Don't Chat About It with me, Rachel, the Queen of the Woke, as crowned by one of my haters. Last week, we looked at the story of the War Games. We are continuing on with the review. This week, we are looking at the performances in the story. I won't be covering all of the performances, so please fill in the other performances that I actually missed below. I won't be covering all of the performances, so please fill in any of the others below. The Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe land in World War One, no man's land. They are very quickly captured and they get court-martialed. They think that they are just in a very normal war, but later they discover that something is amiss, so they start looking into it. They discover that the warlords are playing a game and pulling warriors from their own time zones in order to conquer. The Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe team up with a group of misfits that have fought off the processing in order to put a stop to it. However, the Doctor soon discovers that he can't fix it by himself and he calls upon the Time Lords. The Time Lords then take the Doctor prisoner and put him on trial for his part in the War Games. He is found guilty and sent into exile and forced to regenerate. Philip Maddock, who very promptly became a regular on this show, was presented to us in the guise of the Warlord. Now, I find his performance very intriguing. In his other stories that he's actually done, he is very animated, but here he is not so animated. He has a striking air of authority in his entire performance, but he barely cracks variation in his facial expressions. It's almost a manic type of catatonic type of performance that makes him bonkers and weirdly mysterious at the same time. He is a character that is actually very hard to read. None of it is upstaging. He doesn't dominate, even though he is commanding the screen. There's a certain menace behind it, too. I'm glad that his menace doesn't actually upstage anyone, because whilst he is head honcho, so to speak, the War Chief is a much bigger character. The War Chief, played by Edward Brayshaw, not Bradshaw, as this Word document keeps telling me, he's a very well accomplished actor. The only thing that the War Chief runs the risk of doing is becoming a hammy type of performance. Now, he does not do that. He is actually quite scary at times. He doesn't have the air of menace, but he does have the air of wanting to domineer and conquer. There's no over the top performance here, in my opinion. He is commanding. You know he is in charge, and yet he shows us where he is breaking down and failing with a certain finesse, I think, actually. I will say that I'm one of those people who actually doesn't believe the War Chief was the master. I believe he was the foundations behind the character because of Terrence Dicks, and that's where the idea for the character comes from. But I think that is truly as far as it goes, because if he really was the master, then why didn't they just bring back Edward Brayshaw? Carstairs was played by David Saville. I wasn't sure if I was going to cover this character or not, but I chose to put him in because he's one of those few characters that was actually all the way through the story. A lot of the characters actually come and go, but he was a mainstay. And I think Carstairs was a much needed character in this. I believe so. There needed to be a character with an authority that wasn't an alien, but the Doctor needed to get through the time zones and fight off the enemy with. And this actually comes in the form of Carstairs and, of course, later the Resistance. Now, I wondered if David had been a military man himself, because of the way he holds himself throughout is something that I would have actually expected to see with that of a military man. For example, my cousin, he served in the Navy and his stance is actually very upright and he holds himself extremely differently from my brothers, uncles, and my dad. And well, obviously, that's just more of an observation, or maybe he is just that much of a sort of like good mimicker with body stance that he was able to pull that off. Now, he is a very fine actor. You can see the process, like here, look at this. It's going behind his eyes. You know what he's actually thinking and feeling at all times. It's almost like he truly became the character, very sort of method. He strips away himself and becomes Carstairs. Sometimes it's easy to tell, especially with children, when they are not fully connected with the character and they are just going through the motions, as perhaps my old drama teacher would actually have said. That could be a simple lack of experience with something, or just not fully adjusting to what the character wants and actually desires. And at the end, I was really, really disappointed. I don't know about anyone else, but I was really disappointed that his character never actually got back to Lady Jennifer. The way the two performers interacted with each other actually made you believe they were from the same time zones, and that's also marks of very talented performers. Actors quite often, for the first time, meet and then they just act with no knowledge of the other person. Very little time to build a rapport, probably particularly back then as well, and to have the characters bounce off of each other. It's one of the reasons why we get screen tested quite a lot, actually. Fraser Hines is great in this story as usual. I feel like he actually plays Jamie a lot smarter in this story. His performance shows off a certain knowledge and understanding of what it means to actually be with the Doctor, especially at this point. There aren't so many of his like Jamie-isms where he makes mistakes for something or for something else, or misuses a word or something like that. Jamie is also actually in his forte of a military man because he's a Highlander, so that's something he can also use to his advantage. It gives Fraser that sort of extra status that he actually needs. Fraser plays Jamie really well. He uses just the right amount of inquisitiveness, but he also pushes forward the strong fighter and defender in his character for this story, more so than any other story he has done. And that's just my opinion there. Now, I actually quite like that because if you think about it, Jamie is a hero. He's a defender of his country, Scotland, but he also has his morals and that he stands with, and he doesn't let the war games get in the way of his morals. You even see that with his interactions with the only red coat that we actually see for the majority of the story until the end. That could have easily gone the wrong way with the writing, but they chose not to do that, and they had Jamie overcome it and actually be the better man. Wendy Padbury as Zoe Harriet is fantastic. Yes, I know I look like her. I thought I'd best say it because it's not the first time that the comparison has been made. I haven't inflated my hair as much as I normally do in order to try and look less like her. But it's a really nice comparison too. But I just thought I'd put a stop to that before it comes into the comments. You can say it if you want. I don't mind, but it's just that I know people make that comparison. Anyway, Wendy Padbury is quite charming, actually. She presents herself as a smart woman from the future. She plays her as she is written. I always have believed that, actually. She does that. Sometimes actors go in the other direction. She doesn't go against the grain with her character. I don't know, actually, if Wendy uses method acting or not with Zoe. It's actually quite tricky to tell. Now, my favorite part of her performance is actually her last scene. The amount of confusion she plays it with is spot on. It's like she made Zoe aware that something had happened just prior to the Doctor leaving, but she's not entirely sure as to what it was exactly. I got the impression from that scene alone that if she had thought hard enough, she could probably break the memory wipe that the Time Lords had actually done on her. Now, I haven't forgotten the most important person, the lead, Patrick Troughton, who had decided that it was time for him to bow out with Doctor Who. It's a good thing that he did, actually. I think if he had stayed too long in the role, then I think he would have actually sabotaged himself. Now, that sounds really bad, but I often feel that was the case with Tom Baker. Now, the Doctor's final swan song is always his most saving grace hero moment, his biggest sacrifice. And his biggest sacrifice was handing him it all over to the Time Lords, knowing that he in turn would be in danger of their wrath. Patrick who is very much a character actor, in my opinion, is in his prime with this story. Whilst the role of the Doctor is not really that for a character actor, it was a good choice to actually put him in the role because he brought something a little bit different compared to what we had with Hartnell. Now, Patrick does not actually go with the buffoonery that he sometimes uses with the Doctor in this. He steers himself away from it, actually. In fact, he tends to go for a more pensive Doctor throughout the story, whilst maintaining his grandfather type figure and his quick temper that he has as the Doctor, which was carried through from Hartnell. Now, for the most part, though, he chooses to go for the more pensive Doctor, as I've already said. I think he chose to do this so that the viewer would be shocked at the supposed double cross. And when it got to the episode where the Time Lords are introduced officially, then he could really fully let loose and go for it in his defense. The sheer anger that he demonstrates at the Time Lords for questioning his meddling makes you connect with him more than the Time Lords. The anger he demonstrates for forcing him to regenerate makes you truly sense his panic of not wanting to go. Now, I use the word demonstrates. I don't mean that Patrick is by any means doing any demonstrative acting. I really don't. I don't believe he does that at all. I'm just using it as a descriptor. He makes you understand that what he's facing is definitely the end of his Doctor, and that is scary. That's what I think. Let me know what you think. Chat about it, don't shout about it. Like and subscribe. Part 3 will be next Sunday, and we'll be looking at the pacing. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.